Welcome back, everyone. Now we'll be hearing from another amazing panel on the applications of AI, machine learning, and emerging technologies in the exciting move toward net zero. The panel will be moderated by Kayalin Akens-Irby. And Kayalin.
Hi, everybody. And I guess happy Thursday. Really excited to be here. I'm going to quickly start with just introducing myself and really introducing the premise of this panel. I'm really excited around the topic in general and the speakers we have. But as Emmy touched on, my name is Kayalin Akens-Irby. I'm the head of partnerships at Planet Forward, where we're building a platform to make it easier to bring sustainable products to market, starting within food. And also getting them on a path to net zero emissions, given that our food system currently accounts for about 26% of our global emissions. I also do some investing through Amasia, which is a climate VC, amongst other things, but I'm really heavily involved in the climate tech space, and I'm excited about the topic of today's panel, discussing, the applications of artificial intelligence as it relates to ideally getting us on a path to reduce emissions and also increase energy efficiency within our energy system. I wanted to first just start with a touch of framing when we think about what this means in the broader context. And then I'm going to introduce the panelists and let them also introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the great work that they're doing. But similarly, another one of our largest sources of emissions currently is our energy system. Electricity, produces around 1/4 of our global emissions. And when we think about our routes to net zero and to starting to get on a path, ideally to hit the point of drawdown or starting to, halt climate change and start getting back to where we need to be, there's a lot of different things that need to happen to make that work. But really, we need to be enhancing efficiency within our grids. We need to be shifting production towards renewables and away from fossil fuels. And we really need to be improving the system more broadly. There's going to need to be more flexible grids to facilitate the transmission of effective energy storage and all of these different things. And so when we think about all of those challenges, but also opportunities, artificial intelligence is a huge catalyst that can accelerate those processes, make them happen more efficiently, and ideally within the timeframes that we're actually going to need when we think about the importance of net zero for our climate goals. So really excited to dive into that today. Quickly, our panel is made up of a number of wonderful people that I'm excited to get to know more about today. We have Martin Wainstein here, the founder and executive director at Open Earth Foundation. We have Shahram Farhadi, who's the CTO at Beyond Limits. Alisa, Kreynes, who's the co-founder of SolarSkyrise, and Ejimuda, who is the CTO at Hybrid Data. So I'm going to quickly let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how their work factors into all of this. And Martin, it would be great to start with you. Can you, Martin, I think your audio might be off. We can't hear you yet, but maybe we turn to Alisa real quick, and Martin, we can figure that out in the background.
Sure. Hey everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everybody. My name is Alisa Kreynes. Great to be here. I'm a co-founder of SolarSkyrise. I'll talk a bit about what we do, what the company does. So we address the largest source of emissions, which is our buildings. And more specifically, we look at large tall buildings that have the largest footprints, carbon footprints, and that often have the most challenges to tackle those carbon footprints. Our technology plays a very important role in getting us to net zero future because it really addresses those large buildings. Urban real estate is responsible for over 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and our building stock continues to grow as cities grow. Based on the UN data, the rate at which our cities are growing is equal to adding a New York City to the world every year for the next 20 years. It sounds really cool, but it also presents a huge challenge because adding more buildings means adding more emissions, which we desperately need to reduce in order to meet the climate goals of the Paris Agreement. So what our technology does is it analyzes entire building envelopes and identifies all possible applications of solar panels, which includes windows and facades versus just the traditional rooftops. Our AI also looks at the emissions reductions, the ROI, energy cost savings, and asset value increase that all result from these new renewable energy sources. The reason we built our technology to look at these different aspects of a project is because these are the fundamental drivers that can move a project forward and help scale the technology to market. And our end goal is really to transform the way we look at real estate. If we can use our walls and windows to generate clean power and reduce emissions while saving money and making money, we're really creating a new dimension of value. And this new dimension will help us rethink the way we plan, design, and construct our buildings and really get us closer to net zero goal. So I'll stop here. I think we have 3 other panelists to introduce themselves, but that's what we do at SolarSkyrise.
Thank you. And I'm really excited to dive more kind of just into your background overall and some of the learnings that you picked up over the last 20 years working within the space. But quickly, I guess, CJ, let's jump to you and hear a little bit from you as well.
Hi, good day, everyone. My name is Chijioke Ejimuda, or you can call me CJ for short. Personally, I've experienced energy poverty because growing up in Nigeria, in the dark, I typically use like candles and kerosene lanterns to either see or read. Such kind of experience has relentlessly fueled my passion for like transforming wasted energy resources to useful clean energy. Currently, our AI technology at TransforMAX, what it does, it helps all electrified rail operations. So electrified rail operations, if you're conversant with what they call the light rail and heavy rail systems. So what we do, we increase the efficiency and improve their reliability, which helps mitigate global warming and decarbonizes the grid along the process. One great thing about our technology is that it's so key to several processes. Take, for instance, if a lot of us are familiar with how current emissions controls and management are being, how the technology works. The core piece of our technology also does that, but for us right now, we're more focused within the mobility space, within the rail transit space. That's just a little bit about us and about myself. Thank you.
Yes. No, thank you, CJ, and thank you for also kind of leading with a bit of your story. I think it's really important for us to think about really the global implications of all of this, and you know, great to hear that kind of there's been a lot of personal inspiration for the work that you do. Shahram, let's pass it to you quickly, and then we'll circle back to Martin.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Shahram. I am the CTO of Beyond Limits. Beyond Limits is a stage C startup. We are based in Glendale. And the roots of the company is from JPL and Caltech. And the initial idea was to commercialize the technologies that were built for space exploration in the more industrial settings as the wave of AI was picking up. And the company got into the energy space 2016, and that's when I joined. And we got to play with a lot of cool ideas as far as, okay, now this is my factory. How do you add AI to this? How can you help my day-to-day life? And then in the recent years, I think the question has changed also a little bit to not only give me an optimal solution, but something that takes into consideration the carbon footprint and the environmental impact. So we're not only trying to maximize dollar anymore. I mean, from an AI standpoint, it's just another variable to look at. But I think from a social standpoint, that has become a request, which is a good thing to see, even from the major companies, even from the major oil and gas companies. This is now an objective. And we have been building technologies across really industrial sectors of power plants, utilities a little bit, and oil and gas. Also, some of it that is really related to how we help the cause of net zero. I think one of them that is fairly cool is a technology that we developed for leak detection. So if you have a methane leak, how could you sensorize your system so you could pick it up the moment it happens? And methane is particularly important to us because it is kind of a fossil fuel, but it's the best fossil fuel that we have, and it could act as like a good transition fuel, as long as we make sure it doesn't leak, because the impact of methane is way worse than CO2. So as long as we kind of have pipelines that are under control, it could be an interesting solution. We're also working on some more exciting projects as well in the battery space. How do you use AI to search for the best formulation of the batteries that give you the specs that you're after? So yeah, that was a quick introduction.
Absolutely, so exciting. And it's also great, kind of just the diversity in terms of the different solutions people are working on here. So excited to have you all. Martin, do we have you back now?
Let's try. I think
yeah,
my headphone was also connected to the phone in the clubhouse. So it was like, where am I? So great to be here. Really, thank you, Kayalin. Thank you, Todd. Thank the whole team of Earth Summit. Pleasure to join. I'll talk a little bit about what we do at the Open Earth Foundation. We're a research and deployment nonprofit. We started last year. Our focus is in the intersection between emerging digital technologies such as IoT, AI, and blockchains working together in sync, and also the digital infrastructure to allow a lot of that interplay and the data layer to work in regards to different Earth system projects. And so that takes us a lot into the open source realm and multi-stakeholder collaboration. How we define our verticals of research and then developing projects is mostly a model on systems thinking to identify key leverage points, and then design thinking to say, okay, how can we turn this into a specific open source project platform that can help a lot of the entities. For example, if we're looking at climate, to orchestrate your information and establish trusted interactions. The foundation is it's in some sense acts like a spin-off to the Open Innovation Lab at Yale University that I also lead. And two of the projects that we've been working on there, just to give illustrative examples, are around climate accounting and how do we establish an integrated accounting system that allows all climate actions, whether it's emissions, mitigations, or adaptation, to be able to roll up in the Paris Agreement, so that whether it's individuals, organizations, corporations, cities like LA can be part of the process of the Paris Agreement. And there's caveats to that. I'm happy to chat about it later. And the other one is on how do we leverage smart contracts and different digital currency or distributed ledger technologies to automate how do we finance distributed energy resources such as solar, and how do we establish pay-to-own models so that community members end up owning the energy infrastructure and then aggregating in the context of microgrids. What started that project was Hurricane Irma and Maria taking down the grid in Puerto Rico. And then we sort of started researching what had happened and designing peer-to-peer platforms that could help people have better access to financing for their solarization and batteries, because in the face of hurricanes, that normally is a big impact. I'll pause there and happy to jump in other topics as we move along.
Oh, thank you so much. And hearing about kind of even tidbits of the origin stories here. Makes me just want to dive into kind of what you were thinking at that time and how it became what it is today. But I think in terms of questions, I have a few questions for the whole group and then also some questions for you guys individually. But I think to start, very much just within the focus of this panel, I would love for you each to touch on, what do you see as the largest challenge right now when we think about really being able to either scale your current technology and how AI is directly playing a role in helping with that or getting to where you need to be. And CJ, maybe we can start with you.
Thank you. For me, for us, the kind of barriers we see, which is expected for a highly regulated industry like the rail industry, is just like there's a lot of long sales cycle because they are so highly regulated and it's a very critical industry. They're a lot more slower to adapt new technology, which is quite understandable. So those are like for us the main barrier we see.
And when we think about AI within that, are you seeing any applications that are helping in that way, or?
The truth is, so the rail industry areas that I've seen like applications converting. So typically the freight trains, they use what they call diesel engines. So there are some of them that use like a hybrid engine now. So basically they have like an energy storage battery combined with, the diesel engine. But for us in the area we play in, we just play in the electrified rail systems. So those are the light rail and the heavy rails, they don't use no diesel. But based on all my experience so far within that space, I've not really seen a startup like us doing something like that. Rather, what you might see are like the bigger incumbents already within that space, something like the Siemens, the ABB, the Hitachis, they are doing some form of AI, but not as, more cutting edge like we are doing at TransforMAX. And the reason for that for them is they're such a big organization. They just have like so much within their plate to play around. Like I mentioned, Siemens doesn't only work within the rail industry. They do energy, they do, so many. So but within the light rail and the heavy rail, not seeing a lot of startups doing things here.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense. And obviously, within kind of these sectors, there's a lot of just incumbents and legacy things that need to work through. So that makes a ton of sense. I think kind of on that note, Alisa, your company is taking that on head on and really trying to transform our real estate, one of our biggest incumbents out there, and starting to, modernize it and make renewables a reality within our infrastructure. And what would you say the largest challenges for you when you think about scaling your technology or even scaling the impact you're looking to see, and how you're using AI to accelerate that or overcome some of those barriers?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think it kind of applies to a number of different sectors and a number of many problems that we're trying to solve across, climate change action. So I'll give you a pretty general answer that I think will apply to many problems. The biggest challenge in new technology in general is cost and technical complexities that most first movers will have to deal with. And it applies to buildings, it applies to transportation, it applies to water, maritime, you name it. So I think the challenge is very common. I think that challenge also presents an opportunity for those organizations who are innovative and smart and want to be the leaders in the space. There's an obvious first mover advantage when it comes to being the first adopter, the first user of a technology or a solution. We've seen this with Tesla, we've seen this with many other leaders in technology innovation space. So I think there's an obvious opportunity there for the private sector to act on it and support new technology and new solutions. I think for the public sector, there's also an opportunity, and that is in being able to accelerate things through policy and through investment. And that is something that we've been lacking in the US for a long time. But we are optimistic that the Biden administration, which clearly makes climate a top priority, will be supporting through both policy and investment. And the AI angle, the reason we have built the AI to work on these large buildings is really to accelerate the deployment of the technology that's been sort of at that tipping point for a very long time. So the whole approach and the genesis behind building our tool was really to help move projects forward through by making it easy for decision makers to approve projects, to see the return on investment, to see what the benefits are. So that's been our solution all along, and we stay with it. But I think my answer probably applies to new technologies in general and like what the biggest key challenges are from the start.
Absolutely. And I appreciate what you're saying, especially given that, there weren't the regulatory incentives or environment for the last 4 years to, support these types of transitions and moves. And so a technology like yours that's making it very, very clear what the business case is for it is so huge and universally applicable. So I appreciate you for that entirely. Awesome. And Martin, when you think about kind of just the various solutions and things like that you're advocating for, or just more broadly, when we think about our goal of getting to net zero, what do you see as some of the biggest barriers and any just opportunities you see to overcome those?
Yeah, I'll maybe mention 3 specific cases that on one side it's at the broad level, but also at specific in our work at the foundation. The first one is funding very specific research initiatives. The second one would be scaling collaboration. And the third one, data integration. And so I wouldn't say that AI helps all 3, but I can think of how AI can play a role in addressing those 3 and I'm very interested in that process going forward. So part of the funding is around common digital infrastructure. Sometimes the way that we explain that is everyone's building a website, but no one's building the internet. We need to be able to establish the common framework by which we are going to talk about climate, but how we're going to deal with our accounting process to net zero. And because it's kind of like everyone owns that public space, but no one specifically. Sometimes specifically hard to fund. One way that I think the AI will help in co-funding radical innovations is through new opportunities around crowdfunding models, where AI and different other algorithms can help in the process of where to allocate capital that the crowd is allocating. The second point, which was on scaling collaboration, in many ways, we talk about it, that's probably the most important technology we have, is the power of humans working together. Because there might be amazing technological solutions in one part of the world in the sector, but it doesn't fit, or it's not being implemented in sectors where they're most needed. We work, for example, very closely to the climate policy process under the UNFCCC, under the Paris Agreement. And in many ways, the burst of technology that we see in Silicon Valley, let's say, and different innovation hubs, has a harder time integrating into more legacy-based systems. And collaborating between multiple actors probably around that main infrastructure will help. Again, AI, there are different AI solutions that we bump into in terms of collaborative technology, and they relate a lot to some of the things that the collective decision-making. And then the third part is around data integration. Is if the way that I talk about carbon and a company talks about carbon mitigations in a different way on our data structures, and the city of LA has to put together a carbon inventory, but all the data sources come in different languages, how do we establish that integration process? And this is also where AI can actually help, and we've been doing a lot of work on this process around tagging all data processes and being able to have AI put together what are the right taxonomies to understand different data structures. So obviously it's a bit of a wormhole, but those would be three cases that I can think of to share.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that structure so much. And I also like that you touched on, crowdfunding and funding as a huge opportunity. Something that we talk about a lot of the time, given that I come from both climate tech and finance, is just the fact that, venture capital and a lot of our more traditional financing institutions aren't really cut out for climate tech solutions or for these things that are going to take a while to deploy, or they're going to take a while to scale, just given the heavy upfront investment or infrastructure applications and all these different things. And so I see crowdfunding and alternative funding sources as a huge aspect of the solution. I'm glad. Shahram, as we move to you, first of all, I would love to hear about, similar question around barriers and how you see AI playing into that. But it also sounds like you're really focused on kind of what we do in the interim between now and net zero and some of our most promising transition solutions. And I would just love to hear from you, not only what you think is maybe some of the biggest barriers to us getting to net zero and how AI plays a role in that, but also what you see as some of the best interim solutions as we think about transitioning.
Yeah. So I think most of what Alisa and CJ mentioned as far as being, it's not the easiest thing to deploy AI across industries. And the main reason for that is that AI is different from traditional software in the sense that you basically have the model that is more or less a living thing. Yeah, it needs to be updated. You feed it data. It's different. So you can't just build it and let it go. And most of the industries out there do not have the technology expertise to host this type of models. And the reality is that it's only valuable when you use it. Yeah, we can build 100 models in the lab, and if we don't install them on a factory, on a refinery, on a power plant, it's no value added both for the carbon monitoring optimization as well as the economic value. So from that angle. And this has been realized in the bigger companies that all companies will become tech companies in that sense. So you will at least need to provide the tech enablement layer within your company. It's not the traditional IT anymore. You need to have a techie kind of mindset to be able to even host these technologies. So from that angle, the biggest challenge has been to deploy these models at scale, and then the biggest reward is the same thing, yeah. For the AI company, especially for startups, that and it's a large number of them now that need to generate some revenue fast. But sometimes just the cycle of decision making in the industries that are not ready could actually be a very difficult thing to overcome. But there are certainly more sophisticated type of AI technologies that you could build in-house and help guiding the policies that could benefit the climate decision making. So let's say that if you're working on a solution to know where is the best place to inject CO2 in a carbon capture sense, you don't need necessarily to have users for that. You could do that in-house and then basically do a study using a sophisticated AI. Those are the things that are lower hanging for especially young startups that they could do to have some use cases before you get to products and deployment. But you also mentioned the transition and how what are the things that the AI could do for that. I think one of the main things is just to measure what Martin was mentioning, measuring what is the CO2 footprint of every activity. And in the industrial sense, every process, anything that the company is doing, just that accounting is the first step. But after that, then you can go back to making sure that you're not emitting by modernizing your sensors, adding the IoT layer, and the strategy of adding like IoTs that would give you may not need to basically do brute sensing and put a sensor everywhere, but you can use an AI system to design. Like if I have a gas distribution network of all of LA, how can I get what I need with 200 sensors as opposed to one at every home? So those are the things that can be done. But I also like to mention that AI is quite wide in what it can do. It can do a lot, but I think it's also just a wave of technologies that are enabler in many problems that have been not necessarily developed for kind of like the real world problems. It has started from the tech world and the internet world, but now that we're pushing them through the climate world, the earth science world, I think the idea of not only looking at the data aspect, but trying to understand what the physics of the system is and building hybrid models, that's a niche and growing area as well. And that is highly sophisticated in the tech talent that it takes to build systems like that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I'm actually probably going to go back to Martin because I really appreciate that you had kind of just dove in a little bit further on the accounting piece. And really when we think about, developing solutions, deploying solutions, there needs to be measurement. There needs to be clear goals to be able to understand if these solutions are actually performing and if they're doing what they need to do. And we also have to have extreme clarity around exactly what we're trying to tackle. And so it's something I think about a lot. I have led kind of the carbon accounting and neutrality initiatives across a number of large private equity firms and their portfolios in the past. And now within Planet Forward, we're looking to be able to do that for food. And Martin, I'd love to take this back to you and kind of just build off of what Shahram had touched on. I know one of the main things that you're focused on with Open Earth is really around accounting and building out models. And so curious, there's a number of different places you could start there, right? In terms of where you're going to apply that first. And so I'd love to hear kind of what types of projects you guys have been working on, how exactly you've been approaching, what to prioritize, or even just some projects that you're really excited about in terms of their potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start on a bit of a chronological process that actually, as an approach, starts from the bigger picture to the specific detail. When we first started researching the application of distributed ledger technologies into the accounting space, it was mostly through how do we establish consensus on the state of the carbon budget, the planetary carbon budget, the physical amount of greenhouse gas that we can put into the atmosphere before it drives above temperatures that we've determined, thanks to the help of our models, are to be avoided, 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. And those were sedimented in the Paris Agreement. And so in many ways, it's like the account that we all share. It's like having the same bank account. And so how do we organize ourselves, humans, but also our institutions and our governments around that common budget? That led, of course, to the role that models, integrative assessment models, determine sort of these temperatures, and as this science drives that way. In the Paris Agreement, the way that translates into each country having a nationally determined contribution to achieving that temperature reduction through mitigation goals. And that's, the process is mostly just to have accountability on that reduction, but that reduction also doesn't stack up to achieve that temperature reduction. So it's a voluntary process, let's say. And as soon as we look into how are we going to track countries' progress towards their NDC, there's a series of applications that come in. like Shahram was saying, one part is the data that they have, but also is the models that we build around to compare whether that data is accurate. And we can establish sort of convergence and consensus. Now, the gap that we identified is that us as and our individual carbon footprints and our organizational carbon footprints, we also have frameworks to be able to establish our target reductions. LA has its own targets for decarbonization that they're starting to roll out. But then the accountability framework for what we call as non-state actors, subnational governments, cities, corporations, and civil society, there isn't really a structure for accounting or accountability. There are different ways in which we can disclose our carbon budgets and footprints, but not in a way that is integrated into that process of national process. So much of our work has been on first establishing the framework for nested climate accounting, and then looking at the role that's spatial protocol. So if your organization that you deal with a supply chain, that supply chain covers a certain area of land or has a spatial analogy or overlay to it. And so does our subnational governments, like our city is nested within California, and California is nested within the United States. So if we're able to structure the inventory processes and the accountability processes to those spatial domains, and on top of that, lay the data, and on top of that, establish also nested AI. So AI applying or giving itself a context that is determined by that spatial information is where we might be able to align us so that every emission and every emission reduction rolls up to, that we can exactly track how it rolls up to the national level, and therefore presented in the scope of the Paris Agreement. That's been our thought process, and in the way the opportunities for AI are in many parts of it, and some of the ones that we were already talking, that relationship between what's the data that the actor, whether it's a non-state actor, is reported in their inventory. How do we run the connect that with running models of what should have been the emission of that entity? There's a lot of progress on this space. So we have very exciting, at least a couple of years ahead in the climate accounting, IoT, AI, and DLT intersection, because the more scarce that carbon budget is, the more pressure everyone has to meet their targets.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, thank you for walking us through that too, in terms of kind of some of the back end on the thinking. Alisa, I'm going to turn to you quickly, and I'm happy about kind of the diversity of applications here, because I feel like I get to dive into different worlds. But you've worked in renewables for over 17 years and across over 20 countries. And I'm curious, when we think about the US in particular transitioning to cleaner energy, kind of what learnings you've come across in other countries that might be helpful in applying them here when we think about getting to net zero?
Well, first of all, that makes me sound really old. 17 years of experience.
No, it makes you sound wise and well taken care of, because you look amazing.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, look, first of all, it's a good question. And I was just really enjoying what Martin was saying about how we really need to start putting governments accountable for carbon budgets. And it's not just about making sure that everybody is speaking the same language on doing their emission inventories, and then doing their emission reporting, and then doing that per sector, by industry, and making sure that all those pieces align. And then again, making sure that that's happening at the national level. So I think that's a super important piece. And that's something that we all want to achieve in order to actually get to the goals of the Paris Agreement. Now, unfortunately, there are not too many countries, in my experience, that have really accomplished that. And I think, the US is certainly, as I mentioned earlier, is finally starting to show signs of hope in terms of climate policy and investment, and just the political will that we're finally seeing from the federal government. Now, many of you may be familiar with what the climate action plans are and how cities deliver them. What probably is not common knowledge is states also have climate action plans. Some states choose not to have them. I think there are only 32 states right now in the US that actually have climate action plans. And it doesn't mean that their cities won't have them a lot of the time. And back in 2018, when Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord, many cities actually went ahead and published their climate action plans in the US in response to that act. So that really shows how a lot of municipal governments have really taken charge at running forward with their climate policy and climate action planning. So I think that's interesting. And that's a good perspective also on how things have worked in the US, which have been, I guess, good and bad in terms of our overall structure of the government here. In terms of other places where I have worked throughout my career, I've done a lot of work in the emerging markets where things are certainly not to best practices or not, shouldn't necessarily be used as a showcase of good governance. But I would say that, there have been good examples of where the government is really collaborative and really is doing a good job at working, with the private sector, working with the research sector, working with the nonprofit sector. And I think those are really important things that we often forget, if we sit in the private sector or if we sit in a nonprofit, we really don't think, well, the governments really have much to do with how we accelerate certain technology to market. But the governments really do have a lot of say in it, and policy and good governance are absolutely critical to finding those climate solutions and scaling them to market. So I really like Martin referring to us having a common bank account and us really needing to act together, sort of as humans in this world, but also as countries, as governments, national governments and city governments. And I think that's a very good way to think about it. And in some ways, I think COVID has also been helpful in like sort of introducing that idea to the world and sort of really relating how something really global really becomes a common problem that everybody needs to be responsible for.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, and I appreciate that, and also just kind of the interweaving of everyone's answers it's been so great. CJ, obviously your work, you're talking about, being really, really passionate about transforming wasted energy resources into clean energy. And for those of us who are a little bit less familiar, I think I'd really love to understand what you mean by wasted energy resources and how those play into our goals around net zero as well.
Okay, I'll try my best as much as possible to break it down. So what we're doing currently at TransforMAX is managing what they call traction transformers being used in the electrified rail industry. So what happens in a typical transformer is when the transformers are underutilized, basically you're not using it optimally. And also there are times where the transformers could be overloaded. So whenever those scenarios happen, whenever you're underutilizing it or you're overloading the transformer, you waste so much energy resources. And what happens is for people that don't work or have experience, working with transformers or within the energy space, immediately you can actually just jump into, okay, we need, an energy storage system solution. We need to deploy an energy storage solution so that we can be able to, produce more energy or, distribute more energy to our facility. But really what you needed to do was do like an impact assessment to really understand what your existing transformers can actually produce optimally. So if you're not able to do that, what you're doing invariably, even if you install, more expensive energy storage CapEx system, you are also because you're wasting the energy resources, the energy losses from the existing transformer. So what that does is that you're reducing the amount of capacity that other renewable energy generation sources can actually transmit into the grid. So in other words, you're also increasing global warming and as well as, costing a lot more, making the system inefficient. But at TransforMAX, what we're doing is what those previously wasted energy, we are now transforming it into useful clean energy. What that does within like the light rail and heavy rail systems we're more focused on is that now the trains can run a lot more efficient. Also, the other downstream, all that connected electrical equipments after the transformers can actually operate more optimally, improve their useful life. Then not to even mention the part of you're also going to be saving the rail operators, you're going to be saving them some cost savings from their huge electricity bill, which makes up their expensive operations and maintenance budget. So hopefully I'm able to, break it down break down the wasted energy resources better for everyone to understand.
Absolutely, and kind of just taking what we have and making it go further. And we think about efficiency. There's so much efficiency to be gained there. So super, super cool. I appreciate that. And kind of on the topic of efficiency, Shahram, I think when we think about, getting to net zero and a cleaner future, obviously oil and gas plays a huge role in that, right? We're going to have to move from the way that we've worked and powered ourselves for however long into the cleaner future we want to see. You had touched a little bit earlier on kind of the potential of methane as a transition fuel, and obviously, your background is heavily related to oil and gas. And I'm just curious, both, I guess, in the work that you do at Beyond AI, and in general, just how you see things moving forward. What role you see oil and gas playing, obviously, in our transition to net zero, and how you or other AI applications have been helping them get there.
Yeah, so we were mainly funded by BP and for this round B, and BP has been going through a transformation by setting very aggressive net zero goals for the whole company, not only its operation but also its production. And it's not only BP. Most of the European-based oil and gas companies have embraced the idea of becoming energy companies and have started diversifying into things like offshore wind and just utilizing the capital and the project management, like mega project management expertise that they have to really broaden their portfolio. It is still a work in the making for them, but I think the move is a good one. US is not there yet as far as the oil companies here. They are still really interested in the fossil fuels and staying in their core business. And I think even for them, they have realized that natural gas is a good transition fuel, and there are reasons for that. And US, by the way, has plenty of it that can be produced fairly cheaply. I'm not suggesting that's a solution, but if we have the option of producing natural gas versus coal, I would pick the natural gas. And as far as how we are helping these companies in their journey is, first of all, in whatever they are doing, adding AI layers similar to what CJ was mentioning to monitor the equipments, to do predictive maintenance, to make sure that no leakage happens, to just be like an AI layer that is watching over your assets, your factory all the time is a good safety measure, and it helps with the carbon impact. But the other side of it, I think, is just how can AI help with the whole transition? I mean, for the renewables, with solar, there isn't much that you can do. With wind, there is quite a bit of actually maintenance and optimization of how you place them, how they would have to rotate to just increase the net output of the entire farm. That is an interesting control problem for an AI system. And I think the bigger challenge really is, in the bigger picture, is the storage. It has been the storage. So either we have like very strong batteries that could store at the larger scales, or we will have to use some of the more traditional fuels as the battery, like let's say methane, if hydrogen doesn't become a possibility. But there is the kind of search for that ultimate battery, and that is one good area that I think we need to throw more talents at. It has mainly been like chemistry, electrochemistry type of talent, but if we add like digital savvy, tech savvy type of minds to that world, it should be able to help us find that solution if it exists. But it could, in theory, expedite the search for the ultimate form of a battery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I appreciate that. And I appreciate, sometimes I think for those of us that are, in the climate tech space, the oil and gas aspect, can sometimes feel like a black box. So I'm really excited that you were able to shed some light on that. So for the last 10 minutes, we're going to do Q&A from the audience. So if anyone in the audience has questions, please drop them into the chat now. And I will start to field those and we'll ask them of the panelists. So any questions you guys have, please drop them in the chat. I have one more question that I would like to pose to the whole group, and kind of whoever wants to answer first, please do. But the topic of this panel is really on net zero, right? And I think that that's kind of a controversial term in some cases, given that there has been a real big focus on offsetting and on the ability to achieve carbon neutrality, but not necessarily the same amount of focus on reduction. And so I'm curious to you guys, within your work, or even just what you are really optimistic about as it relates to specifically reducing emissions, and increasing focus on that and increasing the power of us to reduce specifically. Yeah, go ahead, CJ.
I just want to re-echo what Shahram said, in the sense that I feel like, every unit of energy starts with the materials, right? So I feel like really the major breakthrough in finding the cleanest energy has to come from the materials. So like Shahram alluded previously, having more people from, the electrochemistry and people from the material sciences, taking advantage of AI to even help us build better battery systems than we have currently existing. So I see that as, an area that I see, AI can really, really help us towards net zero,
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, the quest for the perfect battery. I love that.
I'm happy to go next. There's obviously a lot of things around net zero that come to mind, but if I think purely on the AI side, it requires us to be able to have the infrastructure to have an AI model for Earth that really borrows from a lot of the existing models that we have. It starts perhaps in one side on a digital twin of planet Earth, but the ability to factor in the integrative assessment models so that it could really track and it was very interesting just to see the video from Planet at the beginning. How do we constantly make sure in the road from now to 2050 to net zero, which is what we should aim for, is what we're doing, does it have chances that we'll get there? And that's a lot of the things where AI can help a lot, that predictive modeling. And also confirm certain insights that we know from science to constantly feed back into our actions. For example, we can't really offset our fossil fuel emissions with trees and because they have very different carbon time cycles in their carbon cycle. And then being able to have those collaborative models, let's say the Earth Wikipedia of AI models, all working together, we may be able to have more transparent information that can trigger the right type of incentive mechanisms. We were talking before about the role of fossil fuels, and to be able to turn all the business model transformations, pathways, make them happen for the carbon majors. A lot of that incentive mechanism is going to become very important, particularly because there's a lot of barriers to changing a business model that it's still profitable because we still don't price the externalities. And that might come in a lot through data transparency. Not every liquid natural gas unit has the same embedded carbon from its entire supply chain, and we don't price that as well. We just price the commodity in the market. So there's a lot of work as well on incentive mechanisms in markets to be able to ensure that the heaviest thing gets lost first, but that collective action still, that we can constantly have a feedback that we are on our path there. And if we're not, then trigger in those incentive mechanisms. So definitely very helpful, very hopeful to the potential for those collaborative AI models for Earth.
I'm happy to go next. I'm just going to echo what Martin said. I think the big thing is obviously creating the data that is transparent, that is available, that is accurate. Because without having the data, without having the information, what we need to reduce and how we need to reduce, we can't reduce any emissions. So that's really critical that we actually have that data available to us. And the second thing would be de-risking. I think that AI has a big role in de-risking new technologies, and by that being able to accelerate, our pathways to net zero. So I think there are two really big and important things. And I think all of them are based on collaborative models. And I think that the predictive modeling is obviously a big part of it, in both de-risking the technology as well as providing the data, in not just providing the data, but providing data in a package that is going to be understood and that is easy to interpret it.
I can add to that a little bit. I mean, the equation is simple. Yeah, either you don't add or you subtract. And when you want to subtract, the kind of, trees are not a solution because the time scales are not just matching. But there are other ways of capturing, as long as you produce CO2 in not produce it in a positive sense, but you generate CO2 in a central form, then you could capture it. And there is a fairly advanced understanding of how do you inject carbon then, so it can get trapped within certain formations of Earth, so they can stay there for a long time. So I think if we can kind of centralize the fuels that are going to be burned again in this transition fuel, at least at the bare minimum, then we have a hope of capturing at scale the CO2s and injecting them somewhere. But from like an understanding of Earth and subsurface, I think we have enough of knowledge there to be able to make that kind of projects happen at the large scale. The only thing is we need to electrify and have very limited places that are polluting, and then just capture at the source.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm excited to see, the actual deployment and continuing growth of carbon capture technologies. And I know there's kind of been a race recently to get those up to speed. So I think we're pretty much at time, but I just wanted to thank everybody for joining today and for all of the knowledge that was dropped here. And I'm glad we had the opportunity to share with everyone that tuned in. It sounds like my conclusions here are that, AI is applicable across the board, from us collecting the data and understanding, exactly where we should be focused on from a strategic perspective, transitioning our existing infrastructure, whether that be real estate or CJ, everything you taught me today around, repurposing energy that we already have that we're just wasting, and then moving forward into the future and thinking about all the applications of completely new technologies and solutions that don't yet exist. So I appreciate all of you guys so much, and I'm glad to have spent the time, and hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you very much, Kayalin, for taking us through this nice journey. Have a great weekend, everyone, and rest of the conference.
Yep. Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye.